All right, so welcome to Coal Oil Point. This is one of the California UC Santa Barbara Nature Reserves. And we are going to be here today. We're going to be seeing some coastal scrub communities. So we're going to see some dominant shrubs of the coastal scrub community. And then what we'll do is we will head out to the beach. We've got a couple of really nice pristine dune communities and dune ecosystems here, and we will take a look at some dune communities. But before we get started at looking at some plants, I wanted to give you a brief introduction to Coal Oil Point itself. So like I said, it's part of the UC Reserve System. There are about 30 or so UC reserves spread across California, and they are a place for UC scientists to do active research. So there's a lot of active research happening here on the Coal Oil Point property, things like rare plant restoration, and also the snowy plover nesting site is here, and there's a lot of monitoring that happens there. All right, so let's go ahead and go take a look at our first plant. All right, so this is our first plant. This is the brittle bush, which is Enselia californica. And this plant is in the sunflower family or the Asteraceae family. So that is one of your required plant families. So we can go ahead and go over some of the features of that family. As for the vegetative characteristics of that family, it's really variable, right? That's not going to be true for every plant family that we encounter, but for the sunflower family, leaves can be compound, they can be simple, they can be alternate, they can be opposite. It's really variable, but the flower or the inflorescence structure is what all of the plants in this family have in common. So if you remember from EEMB 127, we talked about different types of inflorescences, and this is a head inflorescence. So this is not a single flower, but a cluster of many flowers together. We have ray flowers on the outside and disc flowers in the center. And for Enselia californica, the disc flowers are this kind of purplish color. So it looks a little bit brown on the inside, and that's going to be different from some of the other plants that we see this quarter. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this apart so we can take a look at some of the individual flowers here. So there's two types of flowers. Like I said, we've got these ray flowers on the outside and these purple disc flowers in the center there. So ray flowers on the outside, purple disc flowers in the center. Each one of these disc flowers has a little ovary down at the bottom. That ovary will develop into a single-seeded fruit called an achene. So just like if you were eating sunflowers out of the bag, those are actually entire fruits. So the shell, what you would think of as the shell of the sunflower seed, is actually the fruit outer wall or the ovary outer wall, and then with the inside. So this plant is a shrub, and it's a fairly low-growing, soft-stemmed shrub. It is one of the dominant shrubs of the coastal scrub, and we'll be seeing other dominant shrubs of the coastal scrub. And just like some of the other shrubs, this plant is what we call drought deciduous. So in California, we have a Mediterranean climate, and it's very hot and dry in the summer. There's not very much water available. So that's actually the time that in California these plants go dormant. So they'll actually lose their leaves in the summertime, and that way they can conserve water and not have any transpirational stress in the summertime. So this plant basically looks fairly dead in the summer, but once it starts to rain in the winter, it will green up and sprout and start to flower. So I wanted to show you the leaves here because it does have a fairly unique type of venation. So here are the leaves. I'm going to grab a stalk here so I can show you. First of all, the leaves are arranged alternately, so one leaf per node. You can see in the axil there's a tiny baby little axillary bud. Remember, that is what defines a leaf, is having that little axillary bud down in the base there. So we have leaves arranged alternately along the stalk. They do have a petiole, so they have a little stalk that attaches them to the stem here. And what I wanted to show you is the veins on this leaf. So if you notice, it is palmately veined, right? We have multiple main veins connecting down to the base of the leaf. So a palmately veined leaf here. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can find some of the fruits. So this is an old flower head. I'm going to open it up. And what you'll see there are some kind of mature, more brown colored fruits, and those are the achenes, so a single seed on the inside there. All right, so next up is the coyote brush. So this is coyote brush, Baccharis pilularis is the scientific name. So Baccharis is the genus, pilularis is the species name. And this is another one of the dominant shrubs of the coastal scrub community. So we have a large one here, and then throughout the landscape here, there are many other individuals of the coyote brush, and you can also see some of that really beautiful flowering Encelia californica over there as well. And this shrub is dioecious. So we talked about breeding systems in 127, and dioecious means that individuals are either female or male, meaning that flowers on this individual will either have stamens with pollen or they will have carpels or pistils with ovules on the inside. So you won't see both of those types of flowers on the same individual. And this plant blooms in the summertime, so we don't see any flowers on it now, but I do want to show you some of the vegetative characteristics because it does have some fairly unique leaves. So here I've got a little branch from the coyote brush, and what I want you to notice is that first it's got alternate phyllotaxy, right? So we have one leaf per node there. And I'm going to hold out an individual leaf here. So I've got one individual leaf there, and what you'll notice is that it's oblanceolate, meaning that it's wider up toward the tip than it is down at the base. And it's got some teeth on the margins. So there are some teeth on the margins of the leaves. So having this oblanceolate leaf with some teeth on the margins is fairly characteristic of the coyote brush. And this plant is prone to getting galls. So sometimes you'll see little weird balls or little growths on the plant itself, and that is a little insect that's actually biting the plant and laying some eggs. And I don't see any right now, but if we find some, we will add that to the film so you guys can see that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our... All right, so next we are going to take a look at this vine here. So this is Morning Glory, and it's growing up all over this lemonade berry, which I will introduce you to in a little bit, but we'll start by talking about this vine. So I'm going to pull off a piece of it so you can kind of get a sense of what the vine is versus what the lemonade berry is. All right, so here is a bit of the vine, and you can see that it's twirling and twining all over this lemonade berry here. And one of the features that I'd like to draw your attention to is the leaves, which have a very unique shape. So I'm going to pull off one of the leaves here to show you. So there's a single leaf there. It's arrow-shaped or sagittate. So sagittate is the fancy word that we used for arrow-shaped leaf. So that is a single leaf there. And then we can take a look at the flower here. So here's the flower. This is in the Convolvulaceae, which is not one of your required plant families, but you should still know which family all of the plants on your list are in. So the Convolvulaceae. And it has a completely fused corolla. So completely fused petals. Remember, corolla is the term that we use for the whorl of petals. So it's white, sometimes has a pink underside. They oftentimes can be a little bit pink, and you can see when they're in bud, they are also fairly pink. So beautiful white corolla on this vine. All right, so our next plant is the blue elderberry. This is a small tree to sometimes a shrub, and it needs a little bit more water. So sometimes you'll find it in really wet areas of coastal scrub, or in kind of divots in chaparral, or even in riparian areas. So it does need a little bit more water. So anytime you ever see this plant, you know that there's a little bit more water in that area. And this plant is flowering right now. So this is an inflorescence, right? A cluster of many flowers together. And we can use the word umbel to describe this flower, right? It's a flat-topped cluster of flowers with branches all emanating from the tip of this pedicel here. And they've got these beautiful cream-colored flowers that smell really nice. So if you ever see it out in California, definitely take a smell. This the scent of the elderflower is sometimes used in a liqueur. So if you've ever had Saint Germain before, that's an elderflower liqueur, and it comes from this plant or relatives of this plant. So as we know, flowers, once they're pollinated and the ovules are fertilized, will develop into fruits. And this plant will develop into a cluster of blue berries. So this is why we call this plant the blue elderberry. And the scientific name of this plant is Sambucus nigra, subspecies Cerulean. So this is the only plant on your list that we would like you to know the subspecies of, just because this is a fairly widespread subspecies in terms of North America. So the Sambucus nigra, subspecies nigra, is a plant that occurs out in Europe, and it has fairly black berries. But like I said, this plant has blueberries. That blue color comes from this wax that coats the berries and gives them this kind of bluish tinge. So those are the flowers, and this plant has very unique vegetative characteristics as well, which make it fairly easy to identify. So what I'm going to do is just clip off this little piece of the branch here. And so what you'll notice is that there are 2 leaves attached at every node. So we have 2 leaves. You can see the axillary buds in there quite nicely. And these leaves are pinnately compound, right? This is a single leaf. The axillary bud down at the base means that this entire structure is a single leaf, and it's divided once into leaflets. So it's pinnately compound, and it has these really neat serrated leaf margins. So you can see it's got teeth on the margins, and those teeth are pointed towards the leaf tip, right? So that means they're serrate, just like the serration on your knife. So the vegetative characteristics of this plant make it really easy to identify. So opposite phyllotaxy, or opposite leaf arrangement, pinnately compound leaves that have serrate leaf margins. This is the only plant on your list with those specific characteristics, so it makes it very easy to identify. It also has hairs along the stems and along the center here of the petiole. Okay, so the family of the blue elderberry is Adoxaceae. So Adoxaceae, again, not one of your required plant families, but again, you should know all of the families that are, all of the families of plants on your list, but you wouldn't need to ever identify a plant in the Adoxaceae family. Thank you. All right. All right, so our next plant is this perennial herb. This is the California figwort. California figwort is, the scientific name is Scrophularia californica, and it's the type genus. It's a member of the type genus. So the family is the Scrophulariaceae. And this plant is what I said is a perennial herb, which means it never goes through secondary growth. It doesn't have any wood, but it survives over the summer as a rhizome underground, and then every year it'll shoot up these stems. So these stems are all this year's growth, but secondary wood or secondary xylem in the base of these stems, but they can get quite large. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this so you can take a look at it. So a couple of things that I want you to notice are that it has square stems. So you can kind of see these stems have edges here. If you were to roll it in between your fingers, you would feel very distinctly that it's got these edges to it. So these square stems, and it has opposite leaf arrangement. So we have 2 leaves attached at each node. You can see the axillary buds down at the base of those nodes are starting to grow into branches. Remember, axillary buds can become branches. And it has these triangular shaped leaves. So here's a single leaf. It's a simple undivided leaf blade, and it's got kind of a triangular shape. And what I want to show you closely are the flowers. So this plant is flowering right now. You can see that it's got these little red flowers there. Little red flowers. They've got these kind of 2 little lobes up at the top there. So 2 little red lobes there. And it kind of looks a little bit like an opera box. So you can imagine the stamens are a little bit like people in there hanging out in the opera box. So it's got kind of this one-sided opening to it. So very, very cute little flowers. Once those the ovaries down at the base have been fertilized, they will develop into a capsule. So this is the ovary that's starting to expand. It'll eventually dry up and split open and release its seeds. Okay, so our next plant is the California sagebrush. So it's this gray looking plant here, and I wish that you could smell it because it smells a lot like sage, which is how it gets its name. So California sagebrush is in the genus Artemisia. Artemisia, and the specific epithet is californica. So Artemisia californica is the scientific name of this plant. And even though it's called the California sagebrush, it's not a true sage. Sages are in the mint family. We'll learn all about the mint family and all about sages. But this plant is in the sunflower family. So it's in the Asteraceae family. And it's not flowering right now. But if it were flowering, you would see that it has clusters of little heads, little inflorescences with disc flowers. So no ray flowers, but all disc flowers. And hopefully maybe a little later in the quarter, this plant will be flowering and we can take a really close look at those flowers, and you'll be convinced that it is indeed in the sunflower family. But I want to show you the leaves of this plant up close because it has some really unique leaves. So here's a single leaf of this plant, and they can be quite variable. So they're these needle-like leaves. Sometimes they're forked, sometimes they're not forked. Sometimes they can be very forked, so it just depends on the leaf itself, but they're these small needle-like leaves. And this plant is also drought deciduous, like a lot of the plants in the coastal scrub community. It will completely lose all of these nice leaves in the summertime when there's very little water around, and it will mostly survive as stems. It'll become very dormant, and once the winter comes back and the rains start coming, it will push out a new flush of leaves and a new flush of stems. So this is California sagebrush, again, one of the dominant members of the coastal scrub community. This is a really nice stand of coastal scrub right here. This has been restored and meticulously planted by the management here at Coal Oil Point. to restore it back to this really nice coastal scrub. So we have our California sagebrush, this gray plant. You can see a couple of other California sagebrushes sticking up out here. We also have some other plants you should recognize. So I see this shrub right here with these oblanceolate leaves that have little teeth on the margins. And this plant is coyote brush. And then we have another plant that you should recognize here, this shrub in the sunflower family with the yellow ray flowers and the brown disc flowers. Here you can see the brown disc flowers very nicely. So the yellow rays, the brown disc flowers, and it has these leaves that are palmately veined. So leaves with 3 main veins on the underside, all attaching at the tip of the petiole there, so palmately veined leaves. So this plant here is Encelia californica, the California brittle bush. So all of the dominant shrubs that we just reviewed, the coastal sage, California sagebrush, the Encelia californica, and the coyote brush, the Baccharis pilularis, all 3 of these plants are in the sunflower family. So all of them have that very characteristic head inflorescence. And again, like I said, the Baccharis, the coyote brush, blooms in the summertime, so we probably won't see any flowers, although flowers have been coming early this year, so maybe we'll catch some a little bit later in the quarter. All right, so next up is the quail bush. So this is another dominant member of the coastal scrub community. It's got this kind of grayish color. It really stands out among the other plants here. The scientific name of the quail bush is Atriplex lentiformis. So Atriplex lentiformis. The family that it's in is the Chenopodiaceae. So Chenopodiaceae family means duckfoot. And the leaves are shaped a little bit like a duck foot, right? They've got these 2 points and this kind of long tip here, so almost kind of sagittate leaves again, or arrow-shaped leaves. And what you'll notice, I'll try and turn this back and forth, but they've got this kind of really interesting shine to them. So they don't have any hairs on them. They're glabrous, which is the term we use for a leaf surface that has no hairs, but it does have these little structures that kind of make it shine in the sun and kind of give it this grayish color. And this plant will produce these kind of long clusters of flowers. These are last year's flowers here, last year's flower clusters, and hopefully we'll be able to see some this year, but it doesn't look like there are any flower clusters on the plant quite yet. But last year's dried flower clusters, you can see they're kind of like catkins. They hang down. They're wind pollinated. They're not very showy and don't have any real colorful petals or anything. Okay, so this is the quail bush. You can see there's a couple other individuals there, also with some of the Encelia californica, the really beautiful sunflower, and some California sagebrush here, as well as some coyote brush. So again, another nice review plant here. So what we're going to do is come on down and take a look at this grass. So this is the next plant on your list. This is giant wild rye. So giant wild rye is, the scientific name is Elymus condensatus. So Elymus condensatus. And it's in the grass family, in the Poaceae family, which is one of your required plant families. And again, what that means is that you should be able to identify an unknown plant to that family, right? So you should see a plant, know the characteristics of the Poaceae family, and then be able to identify a plant to the Poaceae family. So I want to go over some of the characteristics of the Poaceae family, because this is a very giant grass, so it makes it really easy to see the features of this family. So first we can take a look at the leaf arrangement, or the phyllotaxy. So we have one leaf per node here, which means that the phyllotaxy is alternate. So one leaf per node, alternate. And we also want to take a look at the leaf venation. So the leaf venation, you can see all of those veins are running really nicely parallel to each other. So this is parallel leaf venation, very typical of monocots, right? The grass family is a monocot. Another feature of the grass family is that they have hollow stems. So it might be a little bit tough to see, but if you think of bamboo has hollow stems, and that is a characteristic of the grass family, so bamboo is in the grass family. And one other characteristic I want to point out to you is the base of the leaves here. So here's a single leaf, and if I go ahead and pull this off, you can see that the base of the leaf has this sheath, and that sheath wraps around the stem. So all members of the grass family have these sheathing leaves that wrap around the stem. And the grass family is a really economically important family. A lot of our food comes from the grass family, and in fact 60% of the average person's diet comes from 3 members of the grass family. So corn, wheat, and rice. You get a lot of your calories from those, along with sugar. Sugar is also a member of the grass family. So very economically important, but also fairly easy to recognize family. Okay, so our next plant here is this shrub, and this shrub is called lemonade berry. That's the common name, and we'll show you some of the fruits, and we'll talk a little bit about why it has that name. The scientific name is Rhuus integrifolia, so Rhuus integrifolia, and it is in the Anacardiaceae family. The Anacardiaceae is the cashew family. We've got quite a few members of that family on our list, and some of the shrubs in that family are dominants in our communities in California, which is why that we have it as one of your required plant families. So we'll go ahead and go over some of the characteristics of the Anacardiaceae family. So oftentimes the leaves of plants in this family, in the cashew family, are glabrous, meaning they have no hairs, and that's true for the lemonade berry. There's no hairs on either side of the leaves here. They're fairly thick and leathery, and we'll see that's the case for some of the other members of this family that we encounter and that are on your list. There's also oftentimes some kind of red on the leaves. So you can see on the petiole here, there's a bit of red coloring. On the underside, you can see that as well, and we'll meet a couple other plants that have that characteristic as well. And the flowers are oftentimes pink or white, and they're oftentimes at the tips of branches, right? So you can see here's one of the flower clusters. It's at the tip of this branch. I'm going to show you another flower cluster over here. So here's another really nice flower cluster on the lemonade berry. You can see again, it's terminating in this flower cluster. So the clusters of flowers are at the tip, and they're oftentimes white or pink colored flowers, and they will have 5 petals. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these kind of pinkish white petals there in the cluster of flowers. So these flowers on the lemonade berry will eventually develop into fruits, and we will show you the fruits in a second, but I wanted to go over a few more characteristics of this plant, specifically the lemonade berry, which is that it has these leathery leaves that are arranged alternately along the stem, so 1 leaf per node, and the tip of the leaf is rounded. So you can see how the top of the leaf here is rounded. It doesn't have a sharp point, it's obtuse, and that will differ from some other members of this family that we have on our plant list. Alright, so these are the fruits of the lemonade berry. You can see that they're kind of this flat structure here, and it's actually a drupe. So a drupe is a fruit that has a single seed on the inside with a really hard pit. So this is a member, like I said, of the cashew family, the Anacardiaceae family. Other members of this family include mangoes. So if you have ever eaten a mango, you know that they have a giant single seed or single pit on the inside. So this is kind of analogous to a mango. And what you can see is that it's kind of covered in this sticky stuff here, and that sticky stuff is super sour, which is why it gets its name lemonade berry. So I'm gonna actually try a little bit of it. Ooh. Yeah, it's like bracingly sour. So if you ever had a Warhead, oh god, it's so sour. If you ever had a Warhead or something like that, it's really sour. So if you ever see the lemonade berry with these really distinct fruits, you can go ahead and taste it and see if you think it's quite that sour. Oh man, that's sour. Okay, so we are going to start moving towards the beach and towards the dune habitats. So as you can see, we've got some shrubs here. These are the coastal shrubs that we've already talked about today. And as we're panning towards the beach, you can see the shrubs are getting smaller. They're getting more wind whipped. You can probably tell it's much windier and much harsher over here. And what we're going to do is take a look at some of these plants that occur on the dunes. And these plants are in a community we call the Pioneer Dune Community, which are, these are the first species of plants to actually colonize the dunes. So these are very, very low growing, mat-like plants. We're going to see some characteristics that they have in common that help them survive where it's really windy and very salty, and there's lots of sand whipping around. So what we're going to do is take a walk down towards the dunes and take a look at some of those pioneer dune species. All right, so up first is the dune evening primrose. Dune evening primrose is Chamaesoniopsis chiaranthifolia, and it's in the Onygraceae family, which is the primrose family. And this is one of the pioneer dune species. It's this low-growing mat plant, and that helps it be well protected from the wind. We call these mat plants prostrate plants. They're very close to the ground. And I'll show you some of the features of this plant. So first, it has these gray leaves. They're covered in fine hairs from sand. So as you can imagine, if you've ever been out on the dunes when it's really windy, there's oftentimes sand whipping around in the air, and that can really damage tissue. It's like little tiny rocks blowing around in the air. So these fine hairs help kind of protect the leaves from that sand whipping around. So it's got these beautiful gray leaves, and it has these really unique and quite beautiful flowers. So here's an individual flower. They're yellow, and they have 4 petals. 1, 2, 3, 4 petals. So they start off yellow, and once they become fertilized and pollinated, they'll turn more of a red color or more of an orange color. And that to pollinators that, hey, I've already been pollinated, don't waste your time here, and it helps pollinators become a little bit more efficient. So once they become fertilized, or once they become pollinated, they will start to wilt, and they'll turn this kind of reddish orange color. Okay, so next up we have this purple flowered plant right here, another mat growing plant. I'm going to turn my clipboard over here. Another mat growing plant. So this plant is sand verbena, and this is one of the plants that you'll only need to know the genus. There's a couple different species out here. They're fairly difficult to tell apart, but to genus they're very easy to recognize. And some of their characteristics. So first of all, sand verbena, the genus name is Abronia. So Abronia is the genus name. And there's a couple characteristics that they all have in common. So first, they have a flower cluster that's an umbel. So remember, that means that there are many flowers all attached to the tip of the petiole, like an umbrella, an umbel shape. And they have these long tubular flowers. Sometimes they're purple, sometimes they're really dark, kind of maroon color, sometimes they can even be kind of white. I've heard also that the species hybridize together, so that can make them difficult to tell apart. But I'm going to go ahead and put the flower down and grab some of the plant itself. So this is, again, one of those mat growing plants. So it grows prostrate on the ground. And what I want to show you is that there are 2 leaves attached at every node. So it's got opposite phyllotaxy, opposite leaf arrangement. The leaves themselves, you can see this one got a little broken. It's quite dry here on the dunes. And so they have some adaptations that help them to survive this really dry habitat. And one of the other things is you'll notice that this plant is super, super sandy. It's covered in sand. And that's because it actually exudes, it has these glandular hairs that exudes a little bit of sticky stuff. And that basically makes the sand stick to it. And this plant uses sand as a shield, right? By covering itself in sand, it means that when sand comes whipping through the air in the wind, it doesn't damage the tissue as much. So it essentially uses sand to protect itself against the wind. So this plant really nicely displays some of the adaptations that these pioneer dune species have in order to survive this habitat. So they have succulent leaves, they have some kind of way to protect themselves against the sand. This plant uses sticky hairs, while other plants like the dune evening primrose or the beach burr sage have little hairs that cover their surface. They're very low and prostrate to the ground, so that helps them not be super destroyed by the wind. That's constantly very windy here, as you can tell it is today. And it has succulent leaves that help it survive in this environment that is fairly dry compared to some other environments. Right, so next up we have another gray matted plant, again prostrate habit, very low to the ground. And this is beach burr sage or beach burr, Ambrosia chamisonis. So it's in the genus Ambrosia, and the specific epithet is chamisonis. And it has fairly thick leaves, so they're actually quite succulent. And as you can imagine, it's pretty dry out here on the dunes. Even though there's a giant body of water there, you know, if you've ever been to the beach and you've poured water on the sand, that it drains right out. That means there's not much water holding capacity to the soil, so it's actually functionally a fairly dry habitat. All right, the audio went out here a little bit, so I'm just going to describe what's happening. So plants that live on the dunes have characteristics that help them to survive this really hot, dry environment, and these thick succulent leaves are one way that it protects itself. So what I'm going to do is show you a single leaf here so we can go through some of the characteristics. So this is a single leaf. You can see that it's a compound, and even some of the leaflets are deeply lobed themselves. So not a simple leaf. It's gray in color due to these very fine white hairs, and those help to reflect the sunlight. Remember, it can get really hot on the dunes, and I'm going to clip away here just so I can show you the stem itself, and we can take a look at how the leaves are arranged on that stem. Alright, so here is a little piece of the stem, and you can see that those leaves are arranged oppositely. So there's 2 leaves per node, there's 1, there's 2, and you can see that the little axillary bud right there is just starting to develop into a branch. And this is a member of the sunflower family. The beach burr is a member of the sunflower family. Here is the flowers. They are actually monoecious, meaning that there are flowers that are producing pollen and flowers that are producing ovules on the same individual but in separate flowers. So up at the top, like I said, this is a sunflower. Those are all little heads full of pollen producing flowers. And then in the axils of the leaves, there are these little green flowers, and maybe you can see the stigma sticking up there. We can post some pictures of these so you guys can take a closer look at the flowers. And the reason that this plant is called beach burr is because the female flowers will develop this seed that has burrs all over it. And if you've ever been out to this beach before and gotten stuff stuck in your feet, that is from the beach burr sage. Okay, so all of the plants that we have showed you so far today are native to California, meaning that they occurred here before the Europeans were here and they evolved here naturally. But we're going to show you one plant that's not native to California, so it's a non-native species, and we're going to show you a couple of them throughout the quarter, but we'll be sure to tell you which ones are non-native, and it also says on your plant list whether or not plants are native or non-native. So this plant here is called sea rocket. Sea rocket is the common name. The scientific name is Cackele meridema. Cackele meridema. And this plant is in the mustard family, which is one of your required plant families. And so I wanted to go through some of the characteristics of that family. So plants in the mustard family have flowers with 4 petals. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 petals there. The old name for this family was the Cruciferae. That's because they kind of look like a cross, right? Those 4 petals look a little bit like a cross. And I'm going to go ahead and dissect one a little bit in my hand here. So the flower itself has no fusion. So the petals are separate, they're not fused together. The sepals are separate, they're not fused together. And the plant also has 6 stamens, so that's fairly characteristic of the Brassicaceae family. Usually has 4 tall stamens and 2 short stamens, and we'll put some pictures of that so you can see that more closely. But that is a very characteristic member of the Brassicaceae or the mustard family. Alright, so that's the flower. So let's go ahead and take a look at the entire plant again here. So members of the Brassicaceae family have a special fruit type called a silique. It's often a pod type fruit. And the sea rocket has this kind of expanded, swollen silique that is shaped a little bit like a rocket ship. You can see kind of the resemblance to a rocket ship there. That is why this plant has the name sea rocket. And this plant specifically has a really interesting dispersal mechanism, which is that the top of the fruit will actually break off and float away. And you know that we're by the ocean, right? So it can be dispersed by the ocean, and this bottom part will stay attached to the mother. So it's making these 2 types of seeds, one that can disperse long distances and one that can recolonize where the mother plant originally grew. So as for the leaves of this plant, I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the leaves. Again, a dune plant, so it's got some characteristics that help it survive in a really dry habitat. So one is it has these really succulent leaves. So this is an individual leaf here, and it's quite succulent, it's quite thick, and it's divided into leaf blades. So it's actually multiple leaflets here that make up this individual leaf itself. And I'm going to show you this stem right here. So you can see the leaves are attached 1 per node, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1 leaf per node. So alternate leaf attachment. You can see the axillary bud. They're just beginning to grow up into a branch. So again, one of the plants of the dune system. It's fairly succulent, low-growing plant, but it's not native. And it's not necessarily an invasive plant. It's not entirely taking over dune ecosystems. We will introduce you to a plant out at the lagoon that is considered invasive and taking over dune habitats. You've probably encountered it if you've walked around the lagoon yourself before. But this plant is not considered necessarily invasive. So it's not a big ecological problem, even though it's not native to California. All right, it was a bit windy that day, so the audio also went out here. So I'm going to go ahead and describe again what's happening here. So what we are going to do is take a transect from the beach right back towards the stable dunes. And what we're going to see and what I want you to pay attention to is how the vegetation changes. So this is a change that occurs through a process called succession. This is actually the facilitation model of succession, where the early pioneer dune species actually make the habitat better for the species that are going to be coming later in the succession process. So we're going to start here at the beginning where it's really, really sandy and harsh and very, very windy, and then we're going to walk back into the back dune environments. And the plants that are out here on the dunes are these really low-growing mat plants, and so what happens is that these really low-growing mat plants that are down on the soil here, those are going to start catching sand, and they will start adding organic matter to the soil, stabilizing the soil, and making it basically a better environment for the plants that are going to come later. So I want you to pay attention to the vegetation and how it changes in terms of the habit of the plants and the species of the plants as we walk through this transect. Alright, so what you see here is we still have some of these prostrate mat pioneer dune species, but now we're a little bit further from the ocean and we're starting to pick up some of the shrubs. So the plants are changing in terms of their habit. They're getting a little bit taller and a little more shrub-like. And right now we only see a few, but as we keep walking, we'll start to pick up more and more of those shrubs. Alright, so you'll see especially over here we're starting to pick up quite a few more shrubs, and that shrub we have not learned yet, or you have not been introduced to yet, but we have an individual of that shrub right here, and I'll go ahead and introduce you to that plant now. Alright, so this is a new plant. This is the coast golden bush. It's a shrub and it's a member of the Asteraceae family. The scientific name is Icacoma menziesii, and this shrub is very coastal. It occurs in the coastal scrub and it's a member of the coastal scrub community. So I've got a branch here and I'm going to show you some of the characteristics. So I'm going to take off a single leaf so we can take a look at what a single leaf is on this individual here. Alright, so there is a single leaf of the coast golden bush, or the Icacoma menziesii. It's got some teeth on the margin, and it looks a little like the coyote brush, except it's lacking a defined petiole. So these are attached kind of sessile to the leaf. So there's no petiole, they're attached directly to the stem. They are sessile. And they also have a lot of hairs. So the coyote brush was glabrous, and the Icacoma menziesii has more hairs. So like I said, it's the member of the Asteraceae. So let's look at the inflorescence here. It's kind of flat-topped. These are last year's inflorescences. It's a summer flowering plant. And because it's a member of the Asteraceae, it will produce yellow heads. So remember, the inflorescence of the Asteraceae is a head. And right now, it is composed of these old dried fruits. So remember, the fruit of the Asteraceae is an akene fruit, which is a single-seeded dry fruit that is a single-seeded dry fruit that's indehiscent, so does not split open at maturity. So this is all Icacoma menziesii. It's one of the dominant members of the coastal scrub community. It's very, very salt tolerant. So this is the first one that really pops up. as we are moving through our transect here. And we'll start to pick up a little bit more diversity in terms of shrubs as we keep locking. But again, what we're really looking at here is the process of succession, right? Where these early pioneer dune species are coming first. They're starting to add organic matter to the soil. They're stabilizing the soil, and they're making it basically a better habitat for these shrubs that are going to basically be colonizing this land after the pioneer dune species, and they'll eventually outcompete the pioneer dune species, and it'll be more of a coastal scrub type community. Okay, so we are moving again inland from the coast, and you can see the soil here is still fairly sandy, but as we continue on, you're going to notice that the soil will become stabler. It will become a little bit darker, right? There's a little bit more organic matter added to the soil, so it's a little bit higher in nutrients than the pure sandy soil. All right, so you can see that we've got some more shrubs here. The soil is less sandy, quite a bit more organic matter, quite a bit darker, much more stable, and that is what is allowing these shrubs to kind of take over and grow in this area. So here is our old friend coyote brush. So again, another dominant member of the coastal scrub community. And just to highlight some of the differences between this plant again and the coast golden brush or the Icacoma menziesii. Like I already mentioned, the Icacoma menziesii is covered in little fine hairs, and the coyote brush is glabrous, right? So no hairs on this plant. And the coyote brush has more of a distinct petiole. So it's not kind of directly attached to the stem like the coast golden brush is. So again, coyote brush, Baccharis pilularis. All right, so here we have another member of the coastal scrub community. So, but you can also find it in oak woodlands. And this is the bush monkey flower. The scientific name is Diplochus aurantiacus. So aurantiacus starts with the letters AU, which is the symbol for gold, right? It means golden, and that refers to the orange color of the flowers. So I'll go ahead and take a branch off here so we can take a close look at this shrub. So first let's go ahead and take a look at the leaf arrangement. So you can see that we've got 2 leaves per node. The bush monkey flower is also sometimes called the sticky monkey flower. It is very sticky, so it exudes some sticky substance. So if you ever see this plant, you can squeeze the leaves or squeeze the top of the stem, and you'll feel that it is quite sticky. So it's got 2 leaves per node, and then it has these pairs of flowers. So the flowers are born out of the axils there. They've got these tubular flowers here. You can see that big white stigma in the very center there. And I'll go ahead and dissect one of these flowers open. I'm going to grab this one because it's a little bit fresher. Alright, so we can see on the very outside, that's the outer whorl that we call the calyx, or the sepals there. They're all fused together. There's 5 of them there that are fused together into this tube. So I'm going to pull off the sepals there. And then you'll see that the orange petals, they're all fused together as well. We've got 5 lobes there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see that there is a set of reproductive organs inside this flower. There's some orange stamens there, as well as the pistil in the very center and these two flaps of the stigma up at the top that receives pollen. And these will eventually develop into a dry fruit or a capsule that will split open. It's a little bit early in the season for those, but we might find some later in the quarter. But the sticky monkey flower or the bush monkey flower, Diplacus aurantiacus, is in the Phrymaceae family. All right, so we have another plant here. This is blue-eyed grass. That's the common name of this plant, blue-eyed grass. The scientific name is Sisyrinchium bellum. Sisyrinchium bellum. I'm going to go back and talk a little bit about the common name, though. So blue-eyed grass, because one, it's not blue. The flowers are very purple. And what you might consider the eye in the very center is yellow. And two, this plant is not a grass. So grass family, this plant is in the Iridaceae or the iris family. Monocot. So it does have leaves with parallel venation. You can see it's got these long sword-shaped leaves with parallel veins. And they're kind of folded around the stem here. So this is the base of the leaf folded around the stem. And just like other monocots that you've met before in 127, they have floral organs in groups of 3 or multiples of 3. So this flower has 6 petals. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 very delicate purple petals. Barbara. Alright, so thank you for joining our field trip out at Coal Oil Point. I know it was a bit windy, but hopefully you enjoyed the plants that we saw today, and we'll see you next time.